My name is Eric Browning. I'm the building official in community planning and development for the city and county of Denver. Christy, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Christy Collins. I work with Eric Browning on his team with community planning and development, and I work on various sustainability initiatives that we have going on, including as relate to the Denver Green Code and the IECC updates. Amber?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, and we're collaborating with community planning and development on the 2021 code adoption process. You'll also see Courtney Anderson from our office in many of these meetings, but I'm here for her today.
I'm Robbie Schwarz with Build Tank Inc., part of the NORESCO team that is helping to facilitate the new code adoption for the city and county of Denver.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica DeLallo and I'm a project manager for NORESCO and helping to facilitate the city and county of Denver code adoption.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So just to refresh everyone's memory, we are here this morning to talk about residential energy provisions, and this second working group meeting is intended to get as many ideas and concepts on what we're calling the virtual whiteboard that we'll introduce here shortly, so that we can consider what ideas should come into our current edition of the energy codes, what might be better suited for future editions. But no idea is a bad idea, and we really encourage everyone's participation. If you were part of the first meeting a week ago today, you'll find that today's format is a bit different. Today's format is more open, more conversational, and we're hoping for more engagement and participation for this meeting. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christy Collins to talk a little bit more about high-level overview and goals.
And give me just a second to share my screen and get this set up. And I will endeavor to go through this pretty quickly because I know most people in this meeting, or many, may have already heard this beginning portion during our first meeting, but maybe not everybody. So we're going to be focusing today on energy goals, IECC updates, and the Denver Green Code and how that fits in with achieving those energy goals, as well as what we're trying to accomplish through our process and through the working groups and the approach that we're taking. So I think the first thing to highlight is that we know that the biggest impact that we have on new building development is through our codes, and especially our mandatory codes. So we can have lots of incentives and encourage leadership, and that's really important too, but we also need to move the codes along. The Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, who I will refer to as CASR moving forward, worked last year to create a Denver Climate Action recommendation, a 2020 recommendation report, in conjunction with a community task force that was formed by a diverse group from the community, informing, amongst other things, how greenhouse gas emissions for Denver should be reduced, including goals as soon as 2025. So as part of that plan, buildings and homes play a major role. There are a whole bunch of other things that get addressed in that plan, but buildings and homes are what we're here to talk about today, in particular, new buildings and homes. There were goals that were laid out in that plan that will help us to get to the bigger goals that the task force brought forward on behalf of the Denver community, including for new buildings, residential and commercial, to achieve zero net energy built outcomes by 2030. And so there's a trajectory to get there. And Amber will talk a little bit more about those details in a few minutes. Talking about the Denver Green Code, just so that we're all on the same page about how that fits in as an opportunity to support the work relative to the advancement of the IECC. Sometimes it's pretty abrupt for us to just change mandatory codes, and that results in disruption in the community that is not, in the development community that is not desirable. The Denver Green Code is our opportunity to introduce things through a voluntary code first, so that everybody has a preview and can get set up to succeed before provisions become mandatory. It also presents an opportunity for higher reaching teams to shoot for leadership and to show what's doable now within our community. It's not a list of rules, it's a voluntary code. It has electives and different paths in it. So as we talk about potential provisions, don't be afraid to put things on the table that aren't achievable today. Just because we talk about them today doesn't mean they'll wind up in a mandatory code for 2021. The Denver Green Code is our chance to introduce these provisions so that we can all get used to them first. So please bring the ideas forward. More ideas means more options and a greater opportunity to succeed. In 2019, the Denver Green Code was created. It had modest aspirations at that point because adopting and setting up a code is a really big lift in and of itself, but there's flexibility in it. There are options, there are electives. We intend to keep all of those things. 2021 is simply an opportunity for us to grow and accomplish more with this code. We want to figure out what makes Denver wonderful now and how we can keep Denver wonderful in the future so that we all keep wanting to live here and work here and be here. We're active participants in Denver's evolution already. We want to be conscious participants in Denver's evolution. Energy has a huge impact. So not just doing less harm, but actually figuring out how to do positive good for Denver and for our community. So why the working groups? In our typical code process, we go ahead and bring amendment proposals from the community and from the city to advance the codes to committees. The committees consider those proposals in a formal setting and make recommendations on what should be adopted. The working groups are meant to be informal. They're meant to be an opportunity for us to hear ideas and to talk with you and to collaborate with the community so that we can have more ideas to bring forward to the committees and have a better chance of staying on track with Denver's goals. So it's a chance for us to take the 2021 goals farther. We're in this for the long view. We consider 2021 a step in a long process. It's a step in getting us to 2030 zero net energy built outcomes for new buildings, but it's a step in a process that keeps advancing how we deal with energy and with all of the other aspects that are impacting our community right now, and to try to keep it foreseeable for the longer future. There's no foreseeable end to the Denver Green Code. Our plan is to take provisions from the Denver Green Code that everybody has become comfortable with in the development community and move them to mandatory codes and regulations as everybody is ready for us to do that, and then bring in new voluntary provisions to be considered. Denver is evolving, so we should all just keep remembering to think broadly during these conversations. Ideas don't have to be fully figured out. We just need to be thinking towards the long vision for Denver. This little diagram is just intended to make that holistic approach tangible. There's always a loss when we take a whole and break it into parts. So, the sum of the parts doesn't equal as great a thing as the whole, but you can see that positive net energy is one of the parts. And we just wanted to highlight that. Many of the other parts are directly impacted by energy generation, energy distribution, energy use. So energy kind of laces through all of this, and it's really, really important to our succeed. So just keep remembering to think big and think freely in this conversation, and don't be afraid to put ideas out there because it's a voluntary code in the Denver Green Code. If we don't put things in the IECC, we can introduce them in the Denver Green Code and have the chance as a community to figure out how to achieve them before they become mandatory so that we can have a chance at achieving our goals. And we do want to make sure that we're always considering not just the environmental impacts of what's being proposed, but also the economic and the social, because everything acts together as one integrated whole, and we can't address one in isolation without the others. Also, different sites are going to offer different opportunities. We need to just embrace that complexity, because if we do, we'll advance farther and faster. It'll be harder to think through that, to think through how we address different locations. It's not one size fits all for every location around the city and every building type, but that's part of what we need to do in order to get to our goals. So Denver's potential, we're an evolving community, just like every community. We can have regional leadership, we can have leadership beyond. We as the city team are not here to present the answers to how we get to all of the community's goals. We're here to seed conversations and to work with everybody who's in this meeting to just generate more ideas for consideration by the code committee so that we can hopefully stay on track towards the goals. With that, I think I will just go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn the conversation over to Amber, who will talk a little bit more about the specifics related to energy and the work that's been being done.
Thank you, Christy. Here we go. So this will also be fairly quick. We just wanted to give a little bit more context about the reason that we're addressing buildings and homes is that the greenhouse gas emissions within Denver, 64% of them come from buildings and homes. I know we're focused on homes today, so you can see that actually 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions are due to homes. We are working to get to net zero by 2030. And one of the things that's worth noting is that by 2050, approximately 40% of our building stock will be new construction, meaning that in order to really address emissions, we'll need to also address new buildings and figure out what that looks like. To give some additional context, we just wanted to quickly show net zero new buildings, the policies that are right now happening in other cities to basically show kind of where Denver is. So the green shows where there's a net zero energy code or policy in place. So obviously there's some states and cities across the country that already have these. We also, because part of our definition of net zero in Denver is electrification to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, wanted to show cities that are considering electrification or have electrification policies in place. The darker blue shows electrification policies that are more stringent, and the lighter blue are ones that are under development or not quite as stringent, maybe a stretch code, for example. So we've shown these a number of times, but this is our path to net zero by 2030. You'll see on the left, it's for commercial multifamily. And today we're obviously talking more about the right-hand side, which is residential. And just to finish up Denver's net zero definition, we really want to talk about all four of these items. So our definition includes that buildings are highly efficient, all electric. They're powered by renewables. So primarily there, we're talking about solar, and then providers of demand flexibility. So we're really talking about demand flexible equipment or demand response equipment within that context. And thank you very much. So we can get on to more of the conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amber and Christy. Let's go ahead and jump into this collaboration phase. So as Eric mentioned before, we want this to be more of a conversation. So the format's going to look a little bit different, where we're taking a big picture glance at what we envision Denver to be. So to start, I'm going to give a little introduction to the Mural board, which I just sent a link in the chat to everyone. So if you could go ahead and open that up. And then I'm also going to share my screen to kind of give a little demonstration and give an overall look to the board. So just to show you how to use this, you'll kind of see a bunch of different questions on here. We're going to start on this bullseye, but to give you an overview of how to use it, we'll be asking questions down here and over here. And what we'll encourage you all to do is double click to create a Post-it note. And there you can go ahead and type in any comments or ideas or anything related to the question to be discussed further. I would encourage, if you don't mind speaking to your point a little bit, to add your name to it so that we can create more of a conversation when it comes to that point. If you'd like to move the sticky note, you can go ahead and click that move button and shift it around into the appropriate place. And then one thing just to know is, please don't delete or modify anyone else's sticky notes. We're trying to create an overall picture of everyone's ideas. And as Eric said, there are no bad ideas in this format. So feel free to zoom in and zoom out using your scroll button. But to start, we're going to focus on this first question here. And we just want to get an idea of, how do you feel the current energy codes represents the vision that you want for Denver? So how you can go about doing that is taking one of the stars and dragging and dropping it into the place that that you feel best represents where we are at now. So we'll go ahead and take a minute here and just allow some people to place their stars as appropriate. And if you are unfamiliar with the code, you can go ahead and just place it in that less than 25% category.
Thank you very much, Erica. And I'm just observing that it looks like we've got around 20 users in the Mural board now, and nearly 40 on the Zoom call. So if anyone is having trouble accessing that Mural board, please let us know in the chat, and we'll see if we need to take care of anything from a technical perspective. I'll point you again to the chat for the link to the Mural board. It's at the bottom there. We really do encourage everyone to participate. Thank you.
Maybe while everybody is dragging stars over, some of the people who have already dragged a star over can tell us a little bit about why you're placing it where you're placing it, good and bad. We would love to hear the why behind the placement.
Maybe I'll start, Christy, to get the conversation rolling. I put a star near 50 because I see the energy code as a trajectory, as was described by yourself and Amber. And I think we're on a good start, but that there's more to do, and progressively, I think that's the goal, to do more in the future. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to add?
This is Alicia Bach, and I also put my star around the 50% marker for similar reasons. In addition to that, I would say that we're also, in my opinion, running a little bit narrow in the sense of opportunity, with being so heavily focused on the electrification side and not really bringing in as much some of the alternative methods that we could be using. So hopefully we could see some more of those things coming into play later on.
And we would love to hear more, Alicia. That's good feedback. And I know electrification is definitely a point of sensitivity for everybody. If there are other places where we aren't going as far as we could with the opportunities, that's why we're here. Like, that's what we want to hear. We want to know where there's greater capacity that we're not hitting yet.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely
where we want to go first.
Yeah,
Sorry.
some of the things that I had just written down briefly on a sticky note here is some there's, let's see, 6 things. Walk, cycle, or take public transit, maybe incentives or opportunities. This is a big one, like post-COVID and with the city of Denver specifically, the telecommuting and teleconference, even some incentives there, having like built-in infrastructure or something, buying local products, doing deconstruction rather than demolition, recycle and reuse, and community solar opportunities. Those are just a few that I put down on a sticky note.
Thank you. Can anybody else tell us why they tended towards where they did in the percentages on the bullseye? And again, please don't feel intimidated by the room, or like, this is just an idea session. There's like nothing bad that can be said here. We just need the feedback, because otherwise we just don't know how to proceed. And so we're definitely here to hear thoughts, whatever they might be.
Yeah, this is Rob Buchanan from Excel Energy. I kind of followed a little bit of the crowd and put it around 50% because I guess what I'm seeing right now, and having been a part of this for a part of electrification measures for a little bit now, I think I feel like there's a little bit of a gap between the ambition and the achievability there. Not that it isn't achievable; it's absolutely achievable. But I think there's probably a bigger gap between what we think will make it achievable and what will make it actually achievable from even from an affordability standpoint. So that's where I'm approaching that.
Okay. And we'll get to a question later, but I'll just float it out here so everybody's thinking about it beforehand. We would love to know what additional supports we can provide to the community, like as we see obstacles that make these goals harder to achieve. If you can help us to understand what resources might be useful for the development community, for people, for homeowners who are looking to build homes or build additions or work on their homes, to make it more achievable. It doesn't mean that we can offer every single thing that's going to help make it achievable. Even if it's something that you know that the city won't be able to offer, if we can get those things on the table that would be useful, we can start talking about them internally and try to address that too, to provide support where it's most impactful.
We just have a few more minutes on this category. Anybody that put a star in the 75% area want to make a comment?
Hey, Robbie, this is Bill Roctanis. I put mine in that range. Just with the current energy codes, I think have done a good job of pushing the industry forward in digestible pieces. That's one of the things that concerns me about the Denver Green Code as it's currently written. It seems to be a really gigantic leap forward from where the industry currently sits. So I think it's going to struggle with adoption because of how big of a bite builders and developers are going to have to take to get there. And I think the codes have done a fairly good job of getting builders and developers down the pathway in digestible pieces. And so I think I put it at 75% because I know we have further to go and we need to go further. But the codes have done a fairly decent job of getting us there in a way that's achievable in the industry and in reasonable steps forward.
So, Bill, I just want to clarify on the Denver Green Code a couple things which maybe make it less spooky than it might seem. The IECC is the mandatory related to energy. The Denver Green Code is voluntary and it's planned to stay voluntary. We're not planning to make the whole Denver Green Code a mandatory code at all. Our goal with the Denver Green Code is to accomplish two purposes. One is to have teams choose to use it and provide leadership within the community to show everybody what's possible today, because everything that's in there was vetted through a committee of stakeholders from the community as doable, but requiring extra effort and a desire to do it. But then the second, and probably the more important, more impactful part about the Denver Green Code is that it offers a whole bunch of different provisions that we want the community to be able to read, and the development community, the design community, to be focusing on and understanding that these are the things most likely to be discussed in the next code cycle, to be made mandatory, so that our community can start figuring things out. So we're not looking to have the whole Denver Green Code adopted as a mandatory code. It is adopted already as a voluntary code, an incentivized voluntary code, and it's planned to remain that way for years to come, with no foreseeable end to it. But we simply want to be able to give the community highlighted focus on things that are expected to be discussed in the next code cycle and suggested to be made mandatory, so we can partner between the city and the development community to figure out how to make those things achievable, figure out how to do them in Denver, figure out what technology is missing here or is available here that's just not being tapped into, so that when those things are proposed to be made mandatory and moved into the IECC for energy or into other codes and regulations, it's not so much of a shock, and the community can absorb more and have a better chance at staying on the trajectory that our broader members of our community are saying they really, really want us to be on. So the Denver Green Code is intended to be aggressive, and we don't think that everything that's in there will be made mandatory during any specific code cycle. It's just that these are the provisions that have been put forth in 2019. The ones that are there now were put forth as most achievable. And then this year again, putting some things out there that are achievable in Denver with some effort that we can talk about making more achievable so that they can become mandatory and the community can stretch and get there. It's never going to be comfortable, but it is intended to be achievable.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christy. I do want to keep us moving here, so let's jump over to our next question here. If you all could go back to your Mural board access and think about how we might work together, city, development community, broader community, to close that gap between the predicted EUI and the actual energy use in buildings. So again, what we're going to do here is pick a star and place it next to where you think that gap could be closed upon. And I would also encourage, if you have ideas outside of what's listed here, to double click on the side and maybe add a sticky note. So I'll go ahead and give you all a minute. Ooh, should be locked. Sorry about that. Okay, it looks like we've got stars around construction quality and modeling accuracy, and then as well on the user side, where a lot of architects and engineers, owners and energy modelers seem to be where we really need to focus our efforts in closing that gap. Does anyone want to speak to why they picked those?
Hi, this is Steve Eagleberger. I can speak to a couple, as an energy modeler myself, all we can do is work with the plan set. So in my mind, it really is, it starts with the architects and engineers to really understand how to design a building well, how to take advantage of the site that the building is on, how to really put details into the plan set so the contractors and the trades can follow that plan and build it appropriately. We can help just by making sure that ruling off that plan set, we can make sure that they're meeting their energy needs and their energy goals, but it has to start at the beginning. It has to start with good design and well thought out planning.
And this is Paul Kreischer with Heart of a Building. I'll just chime in quickly and say I fully agree with what Steve was saying, but I'll add in there's always been such the important part of having, I put my star by basically operations and behaviors. So the occupant homeowner side of things, that it's 25 years of doing energy ratings and work like that and work with audits and the homeowners. There's still such the gap that I see in people's awareness about what they should be expecting and demanding from builders, and what they're looking for in homes, and whether it's rental or typically purchasing. But that's such the challenge area. So I advocated in our last round of code meetings that there be things done around much larger public awareness about whether that's old-fashioned billboards or of course much more progressive things on social media to help people understand code versus what they really need for a home or building for the next 50 to 100 years. If you're reaching a market of people that care about that, they should know that the code is getting them part of the way there, but not all the way there, and helping them understand those differences. So.
Hey, this is Rob again from Excel. I put my star by construction quality, and that's based on, I manage our residential new construction program in Colorado, and to achieve what the ambitions of this green code, we would have to start seeing homes that are really kind of 30% at least better than baseline code. I know that more than 90% of our homes don't meet that threshold right now. We see, and what I also know is that, excuse me, only around 20% of all the homes built in our service territory even go through the program. So the opportunity there, and I also manage our Minnesota program, and knowing that there is a discrete difference in build quality between Minnesota and Colorado. Minnesota builders build better houses, even though we have some of the same production builders here that we do in Denver. But the construction quality for this for stretch code, just the construction quality isn't good enough yet to meet the stretch code expectations, and there's a significant gap there, and that's where I think that's where there's the most opportunity to close it.
I appreciate that, Rob. I'm curious, would you mind commenting on some of those discrepancies that you see, just comparatively? Is it envelope? Is it systems? I'm just curious.
No. Yep. So there's the biggest one is in envelope. We see our building tightness is significantly. Our homes in Minnesota are averaging just under 2 ACH 50, and in Colorado they're over 3. And that is primarily tied to the fact that in Minnesota it is a standard practice to do polyvinyl between the drywall and the bad insulation. Now there's huge vapor profile issues there, but I'm not going to open that can of worms yet. But that's one of the largest things we see in differences in building practices. We've seen recently a pretty discrete shift in AFUE for furnaces in Minnesota too, where it's uncommon to see anything lower than really 93, and it's very common to see at least 94 AFUE. On the other hand, we see in Minnesota, we see fewer than 5 all electric homes, even with that, that difference in performance. And that's due to, Denver is at least 1 climate zone warmer than it is in Minnesota, and makes it a little bit more difficult to achieve. So it's a lot in the building envelope, and a little bit in mechanicals that we see those discrete differences.
Great, thank you very much.
I think that's very interesting. And my question to Rob is there a statewide code there? Because probably, as you know, here in Colorado, we deal with home rule jurisdictions, and there are several jurisdictions who have totally eliminated blower door testing in the code. So, I hear what you're saying for sure, and it is frustrating. But when a jurisdiction takes that out, there's not much tooth there to enforce.
Oh yeah, but yes, we have a statewide energy code. It is it's a modified 12, and we are encountering a little bit of resistance from the usual suspects as far as advancing beyond that. But the one thing we do have in Minnesota is we do have, and I think it's unique to Minnesota nationwide, is we do have a code requirement for balanced ventilation. So in order to meet that requirement, every new home has an HRV at least in it. So we see that that's a baseline practice here in Minnesota.
And that's a good example of a progressive code that moves things forward.
Before we move on, does anyone else have anything they want to add to the opportunities? I know in my past experience as an energy modeler, a lot of operations and behaviors changed, made that gap grow. How you anticipated in the model is not always how occupants are actually controlling the building. And I definitely saw that in my experience as well. Before I move on, is there anything else anyone would like to add? Okay. And if you think of anything that comes up, feel free to just keep adding Post-it notes. I see a couple added below, which is great. We'll definitely look back on those. So moving to big picture question number 1. We have this slide here just for reference as you kind of think about this question. Looking to achieve the future goals of Denver to build zero energy homes by 2030 and remain a highly desirable place for residents to live. How might Denver achieve this goal while supporting a thriving and balanced community ecosystem? Where does energy use, energy production, and effects of energy production, distribution, and use factor into this vision? So again, you can go ahead and double click here and add Post-it notes as needed. And so I'll give you a minute to kind of add those thoughts. And Christy, I don't know if you want to take a quick overview as people are talking about this. I know you covered a little bit in your slide presentation, but just to get people in the right mindset.
Yeah, just to mention relative to the diagram below, positive net energy is in there. Energy is obviously a big consideration. I think the point of that image is just to say, right now, code compliant design is contributing to some really negative changes in our community. And so we need to do more, and we need to do less harm, but we also need to move past the line of just doing less harm into a line of understanding how our community operates as a system, so that we can then start doing good for Denver and building in a positive way, so that the evolution moves in a positive way, as opposed to continuing to move in this sort of unconsciously uncontrolled negative way. So energy ties into so many things on that list. And so we brought it back because the Denver Green Code is intended to focus on this holistic view of Denver and Denver as an ecosystem and Denver as a social and economic and environmental system. But energy links into so many facets of it. As we're trying to consider the goals, it's good to remember that, you know, if we really want to succeed as a community, we've got to find the creative path forward towards doing better with energy, because it does impact so many things. And it will be important to us moving to the other side of that middle line, so that we get to a positive building towards a future that is workable for Denver for a longer time period.
Christy, can you point out some of the things that have been negatively received maybe from the community, just so we can start thinking about it more intentionally on, you know, obviously how to resolve those ones that have already come up, but of course, try to avoid any other future ones as well?
What do you mean by things that have been negatively received?
Well, you said that, you know, we need like a better way to get the point across, or to it be more welcomed. And so people are electing into that voluntarily. So I'm curious if there were points that you saw that were preventing people from adopting it. Is it like one of the, I want to say one of the callers from earlier, some of the input that we received from earlier, like, it's a huge lift, right, to go all the way into the green code and do it from start to finish. So instead, maybe having some pieces of it that you could pull out, so you wouldn't necessarily need to comply with the entire green code if you're going to go that route, but perhaps there were systems or parts that they could take from it to begin to initiate that process. So we're seeing more than, I think Michaela said, there was like 2 green code projects adopted last year. You know, this year, if we had 100% increase, that'd be only 4, things like that. So some of the points that you've seen have been preventing folks from adopting and moving forward in the community with some of these codes.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen with project teams using the Denver Green Code and signing on for the program is fear of the unknown, more than specific provisions that were of specific concern. We've had some conversations with teams about a couple provisions, so I'll talk about that in a second. But by and large, I can't underscore enough, the biggest thing that I have seen come up is that it's a whole unfamiliar code, and teams are afraid to commit to meeting the requirements of something that is different and new, because project schedules move quickly. Teams are used to working in the zone of the familiar. Risk is managed through staying in the zone of the familiar. And teams that are moving quickly like to be able to rely on technologies that they have designed and installed and used on previous projects over and over again. So I think the unfamiliarity is the biggest hurdle to the Denver Green Code right now. There are 4 paths, and the Denver Green Code as written path is really not difficult for projects. It doesn't call for projects to achieve a huge, extraordinary amount of of additional performance, but teams are scared to commit to doing it because it's unfamiliar. Then beyond that, I do think the energy chapters have been areas of great focus because there's a fear of the additional cost and there's a fear of new technologies being installed and not performing the way that the team is expecting. So again, I think unfamiliarity more than lack of technology or lack of capability is where we're landing. When teams do choose to go to a higher performing project, they typically think it's no big deal because they understand how to design it and how to construct it. It's a different mentality going into the project. It's a different process. It's a different structuring of the design and construction process to deliver a project that performs in a different way. And it's a consideration of performance upfront. So I think the energy provisions have come under great discussion, and I think electrification is a source of tremendous discussion and will be a source of tremendous ongoing discussion in particular. But I think there's fear of added cost or of systems not performing as expected because they're less familiar to the designers and the installers who are delivering them in the projects. And so to me, that's our big hurdle right now. Not that the technology isn't available in Denver, but that if you go and call an installer tomorrow, they will gravitate towards the technology that they've been installing for years or decades, as opposed to technology that's available, but maybe less familiar and less comfortable.
I think you make a really good point there, Christy, and there's a real cost associated with that, right? You know, warranty, follow-ups, supply of materials and parts available for those types of calls. So I think a huge help would be to work with the industry to get that education out there. We deal with this on a regular basis. We're probably one of the most progressive builders in town as far as energy efficiency, all electric homes, zero energy homes. So we face this every day. And we face big pushback from vendors and suppliers. One, because just like you said, they're unsure. They're not confident in the results they're going to get. They know they have to stand behind it. That's a cost directly out of their business to stand behind it, warranty it. And then if there is an issue, are the parts there? Is the service there from the manufacturer if this is not a product that's being used at a high volume here in the marketplace? So that's a huge area where we need to work on the industry, just to supply that training and that level of comfort of these new technologies.
I've seen a couple of folks have commented about incentives in this area. And I'm curious if anyone would like to speak. What kind of incentives are folks thinking of here? Are we talking about monetary? Or are we talking about timing? Are we talking about other areas? Just curious, because we've tried a couple in terms of some small pilot programs, but they're relatively limited. So just curious what folks are thinking there.
Hey, Eric, this is Morgan Cullen with the Metro Denver Home Builders Association. I think one of the biggest concerns that we have is really this affordability component. As you know, it's getting exceedingly expensive to purchase a new home in the Denver metro area. NAHB actually does a study every year, and for this year, it just shows that any $1,000 price increase prices out 2,310 Colorado households out of the market. So it really is that sticker price, right? Being able to qualify for a loan to be able to purchase a new home. I think a lot of when you look at the pricing estimates for a lot of the increased efficiency standards or some of these new utilities, is that you're going to be able to save money on the back end, right? From those improved efficiency standards. But if that's all priced into the sticker price of the house, that doesn't allow people to buy a new home. So when talking about specific rebates, yeah, I mean, any kind of traditional rebate that helps to reduce those prices, I think would be great. Any kind of, dynamic, pricing so that those efficiency standards, the consumer can pay on the back end with their utility bill instead of on the front end, with the sticker price of their new home that they're going to have to, take a loan out on, I think would make houses more affordable and help improve this nexus between affordability and then also the city meeting its long-term emissions goals, which are both priorities for the city right now. So, things like energy performance contracting, and there's a lot of these kind of things that, the city's been working on that would help to reduce costs on the front end.
Great, thanks, Morgan.
And do you think that the cost of some of that technology will come down as familiarity goes up? And I'm asking this question from a sort of parallel but separate reference point on the commercial side. My experience in the past was always, when I was in the private sector, was that the newer technologies cost more initially because of the fear factor, not necessarily because the technology actually had to cost that much. And as familiarity increases, that cost premium decreases because the people who are providing the technology, installing it, maintaining it are more comfortable and don't need to add that sort of artificially inflated premium. Do you feel like that would be true in the residential market?
Yeah, I think that question was directed towards me. So I'll just,
yes.
Generally speaking, right, it's demand, right? When you have a lot of these different products in the market, it starts to get cheaper, right? You saw that, like if you bought a flat screen TV in the early 2000s at Costco, they're way more expensive than they are now, right? So supply chain issues will have a big part of it. There's a huge labor shortage right now in the residential construction market that's creating all kinds of challenges, not entirely related to NZE or some of these green initiatives. It's just labor shortage in general. So proper training and knowing how to install a lot of these new technologies is going to take some time to work some of those kinks out and make sure that you have the necessary training in the labor force to be able to achieve these long-term goals.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I do want to keep us moving. We've got another 5 questions here for the group. So I'm going to move over the screen to big picture question number 2. And what do you think the immediate risks to Denver citizens are as they relate to energy supply, and/or associated effects resulting from energy generation?
And those risks can be immediate, they can be long-term, so they can be something, this year or something in 10 years or something in 30 years. They can be health related, they can be affordability related. All potential risks are welcome.
Right, so some of the things that we've been hearing, like affordability, availability, access to new technology, kind of some of the themes that we're seeing across the board in these big picture questions.
And I actually would encourage everybody to give us thoughts on immediate risks and things that you think are risks in 2021, as well as longer term risks and risks that you think will become increasingly relevant to Denver in years or decades to come, as 2 distinct categories of consideration that might overlap at times and might not.
think some on the stability of the electric grid as being an immediate risk and potentially immediate and even long term. Well. All right, I'd encourage anyone to unmute yourselves and talk a little bit about why you're seeing a lot of infrastructure instability, the fear of losing gas cooking, air pollution, affordability. You have to see if anyone would like to speak a little bit more to their point, feel free to do so.
I'll jump in there. It seems like what happened in Texas is, although it wouldn't happen in the same way here, I think people are scared of electrification because of that, and also the ability of our homes to maintain temperature and resiliency during blackouts and whatnot. And this move to, we have experience, I guess, with what we are currently doing, but if we're moving to all electrification, we don't have necessarily that experience. And how are we going to maintain a stable grid without that? And I think I actually put in the cooking one there, and I think, I actually heard that from my brother over the weekend, that he's not in favor of electrification because he doesn't want to give up gas cooking.
I had that same conversation, Ravi, with my husband this weekend. This is Michaela. It really is a fear. It's things I've heard from home builders as well. One of the reasons why they haven't gone all electric, they always continue to offer the option because a lot of people want to have a gas range.
In some of our work in California, it's been a big topic moving to all electric, obviously, and I think what I've heard both sides, right? But there's also the idea of the indoor air quality impacts from having gas cooking and being as a way to push people into using or normalizing electric cooking a little bit more. And considering those, there's a lot of studies now that are coming out more and more on those indoor air quality when using gas cooking and how it's related to asthma and different things like that. So
I think we
I
also
will
need,
just add,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say, I will just add just super briefly, we are also actually working on a strategic electrification plan right now that's going to be out this month that will have a lot of analysis and detail on impacts to the grid that we've collaborated with Excel on and a few other details. So I just wanted to let everybody know, not to obviously derail the conversation, but just point of, if you're interested in that, we'll have additional information available soon.
And I think that that will be tremendously valuable, Amber, because I think helping everybody to understand that the impacts to the grid are being studied. I don't think most typical residents of Denver are going home every night and reading about what Excel is doing all the time to make sure that to understand that those conversations are actually happening between the city and Excel, and that that alignment is being made so that this isn't such a spooky thing. The prevalence of that as a concern on here tells me that potentially this is an opportunity for just increased communication that would maybe alleviate at least one big concern that's widespread in the community related to the grid, because your team is working with Excel to understand grid capacity and how that transition would happen, so that shouldn't be a big risk. But it is still a perceived big risk because I don't think the vast majority of our community knows of the work that you're doing. And I think maybe similarly, I would question about natural gas cooking and the desire to have a natural gas stove or oven or whatever in a home. How much of that can be alleviated through helping people to understand how to transition over to electric stoves or cooktops or induction, but I understand that sometimes there's a cost premium with induction that's not surmountable. But just going through that whole discussion too, because I know that there are in other locations where electrification is being pursued, and I think in California in particular, there are chefs who have led classes about this, who are able to replicate their most fragile dishes using electric technology, but there's a learning curve. And so how much of it is getting past that learning curve so that we can take advantage of the benefits that come along with transitioning over to electric?
And that might actually be an area to discuss during supports as well. Is that kind of, cooking demonstration, marketing type of thing helpful?
And I mean, we can talk about it now. Like this is a free conversation, and we welcome opinions on this about how helpful people think that would or would not be to offer that type of resource. Or would people not be open to it yet? And how can we help people to become open to it? How do we make these things more accessible for everybody?
And I will just add one more note on the electrification side. Obviously with cooking, there's still the indoor air quality considerations, but that said, 97% of the emissions in buildings and homes collectively, and we've not split it out, so it is buildings and homes collectively, comes from heating and water heating. So something else to keep in mind is that while we do want to make sure we are having the discussions of indoor air quality, because that does have increased asthma rate implications, we also can have the discussion at some point about where to start.
I think
I
that
did
also
on an earlier sticky note for an earlier question say that it'd be good to have like a web series, a city launch web series or something with some informational videos speaking to some of these newer technologies, assembly practices, things like that, because you did mention, that's one of the major disconnects is just not being in the know and really understanding how those systems work and how they could be beneficial to you. But in regards to the gas versus electric stove, I'm obviously one of those people that'd be sad to see the gas stove go. But, you know, speaking with the indoor modeling and things like that, maybe a transition piece would be, you know, you can only have the outdoor barbecue gas where the inside would have to be electric only. You know, that could be like a good transition. So you could still get a little bit of the best of both worlds, but you're bringing that to the outside. So you're not breathing it on the inside. Obviously, there's still an issue with the outdoor air quality, but just some brainstorming there.
I think also just to throw out that this is all talked about as a transition, and people are thinking a lot about electrification, but we need to also remember that the total envelope, all these other areas of energy need to be looked at beyond electricity in order to meet the goals from efficiency and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely some training, I think, internally as a plan reviewer, and then also with our inspection team. I think in one of our last meetings, we talked about how we had an analysis done recently, and we're underperforming in our envelope at like 40% or something like that, I think the number was. So if we had some better resources, internal training, so we knew what we were looking for on the plan set, but then also what we're looking for in the field, making sure those cracks are sealed up, and those, you know, we're not getting as much air leakage in the building.
Okay, should we move along to question number 3?
Yes, I was just about to say that. That leads into our next question. With consideration of some of these risks that we've been talking about, or even outside of those risks, what are some impactful measures available today or expected to be available soon in Denver or elsewhere that might mitigate these risks?
I mean, this is Rob again, and I'll kind of build off of what Robbie got Robbie got the conversation started. But in especially new construction, you know, over the course of 50 years, you're going to get 2 or 3 opportunities to replace your mechanicals. You're going to get 2 or 3 opportunities to replace, you know, your range even. But you're only really going to get one good shot at building a good envelope. So I think to focus on building envelope measures and air leakage and things like that, that's the way to do it today, and that's the way to kind of lock in even that potential in the future for you know, when those measures become those mechanicals become kind of more widespread and maybe more market ready than they are today. Not just, I mean, that's whether they're market ready today is a whole other conversation, but more widespread, I guess, or widely adopted.
And I might just sort of say that in considering where the opportunities are and considering where the greatest factors of impact are, I would go back to just reminding all of us to think about what the biggest areas of impact might be for Denver as a community long term. So air quality came up in the box previously. In other discussions, and the reason why we put the red and green diagram in the upper corner of the mural board, in other discussions that were focused on the Denver Green Code non-energy pieces, we talked about water as a big threat, or and threat's a sinister word, so I apologize for using that, but as potentially impactful to the functioning of our community or to the residents here. The cost of natural gas is an unknown, really, in the future. We don't know where that's going. So some of these things, water is tremendously utilized in generating energy right now, but hopefully as we move over towards renewably sourced energy, it will be less of a giant factor. but just keeping in consideration some of those bigger factors as things that we want to address in the future as they tie back to energy, and understanding that that then informs what are the opportunities, maybe not comfortable, but the opportunities for us related to energy efficiency, or the other three pillars of our definition of zero net energy that will help us with those risks as well. Because it's pretty motivating when you go through the whole list and think about how energy ties to each of the items on the list, to try to think creatively about how we can address energy. It's kind of inextricably tied into many, many factors that potentially will have a substantial impact on our community in years to come.
Would anyone be willing to talk to the comment there about providing contractor accountability? What exactly you're thinking there?
Yeah, hi, this is Kirsten. One of the issues that you have is the constructability gets more complex, and the contractors don't necessarily keep up with the demands. But having the tight envelope and appropriate envelope construction is a big part of the energy conservation. But there's no way for the owner to verify that things were done correctly, and the contractor is the one who's responsible for it. And so if the contractor knows that at the end of the project, they are going to have to pass some sort of pressure test or something to show that they have put the envelope together well, they're going to have more incentive to get it right and learn how to get it right if they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of the cost, as opposed to the owner having to just suck it up over the life of the building in higher energy costs.
So, Robbie, I'm just going to jump in here, but we do have that test currently written in the code. It's a blower door test, and all homes built in Denver under the current code have to hit a certain ACH, air changes per hour target. So I agree with your sentiment completely, but it's already in place, if I understand you correctly.
That was more of an example. I mean, there's other aspects. The HVAC system needs to be operating correctly. I mean, all the different pieces and parts, everything needs to go in a way that functions as the design was intended for it to function. And I apologize, I usually do commercials. I don't usually do residential, so I don't know all of the ins and outs of the current codes. But the one thing that I do know is that if the contractor isn't able to get the installation incorrectly to begin with, there's going to be a long uphill battle to try and get the building, be it big or small, to operate as it was intended. And so finding some way to back check it, to hold their feet to the fire as opposed to the owner's feet to the fire, is a preferred method in my opinion, just because, in theory, they're the ones that didn't get it right. So they should be the ones that have to fix it at the end of the day.
It sounds like it goes back to the UI question about pre and post verification in essence.
Yes.
And someone else brought up enforceability and how these things ultimately get enforced.
And I think that speaks a little bit to one of the topics on our list of potential priorities for Denver in years to come, which is how do we move towards outcome-based evaluation of projects as opposed to code compliance, tying specifically to design, and then specific measures that are taken during construction, but never really tying, you know, the success or the acceptance and approval of the building doesn't tie to outcomes right now. It ties to different phases that different people contribute to in isolation, which is challenging to resolve, but it's also really challenging to get to a holistically performing outcome when each team member is asked to focus on one specific portion, be it design or construction or facilities management, or, you know, there's occupation and we don't have anything that ties to that. And we always welcome thoughts on that transition, because ultimately that's really what we care about. All of us care about the outcomes, whether we're part of the design phase or part of the construction phase or part of some other part of the life of that building. If we're the owner or the occupant, the outcome is all that matters. Doesn't matter if we have a great design if it doesn't perform in the end. But it's really hard to transition to a place where we're talking in terms of enforcing outcomes, because we're not currently set up. And so we do welcome thoughts on that too. Like, how does everybody feel about the thought of moving towards something that is outcome focused and figuring out a system that does that? What would be the fears tied to that?
Controlling occupant behavior. Seems like a real challenge, unless you're going to mandate thermostat set points and usage of the home and all those things that go into the energy consumption of that dwelling. That's a challenge.
Yeah, I would agree with Bill. I think, you know, as an energy modeler and a ResNet rater, we can predict the use of a home based on general sets of rules. But even when I was, you know, working on passive house stuff, you know, there's stories about, oh, we built this home to passive house standards, and then a year later the energy bills are outrageous because the homeowners had put in, you know, 5 plasma TVs and a you know, and a huge video gaming system or something like that. So it's one thing to predict energy based on standard use, but in the end, yeah, the homeowners are going to be the ones living in that house and doing what they want.
So what if the process were to shift so that the homeowner is more of a participant in the design process, helping to inform the assumptions that are made on their behalf in the model, and they're part of the accountable team? Because I feel like some of the unpredictability has to do with homeowners doing things that we assumed they wouldn't do. But I know on the commercial side, when we were really serious about the building performance, we would make the owner sit with us and talk to us and tell us as much as they could about how they plan to operate the building, who they plan to have occupy it, how those occupants would behave, so that we could get as close as possible. And maybe a process shift of that nature would be mandatory as opposed to optional, where that would help with the accuracy of the models.
I'm going to go on a limb and say people aren't probably going to be particularly forthright with how they plan on using energy. I just, like, even I lie to myself about how I use energy in my house, and I'm in the industry and I'm committed to it. I would question the like both the willful and unwillful ignorance of people in their disclosures on how they're planning on using it. I'm sorry.
Then it forces every home to become more of a custom home, which drives up costs and complexity. And I have trouble walking through how I would do that 150 times over a year or 2,000 times over a year if I'm a larger home builder.
Well, and is it only for day one, or are you looking at 1 year, 2 years, 5 years down the road? Because even who moves in the first time who's going to live there forever after?
That's a good point.
And the number of people can change. You could have a building that ends up not being net zero anymore, but it's actually more energy efficient because you have say 12 people living in 2,000 square feet instead of 2. But that's a hard thing to capture.
Mhm.
Seemed like on the residential side that the EUI might not be the best metric. So thinking of a different metric as a possible proxy for outcome-based, like the energy rating index, which has actually done a pretty good job of demonstrating future actual performance. The studies that have been done have shown that they line up pretty well there.
Right. So looking at big picture question for keeping all that in mind, what immediate focus points in the 2021 IECC and DGC adoption might best support Denver's trajectory to successfully build measured outcomes by 2030? So is the switch, looking at these other standards, shying away from prescriptive a little bit, or what focus points do you all think the code should work on this year?
So I'll throw 2 out there. I think the first is that maintain section R402 unmodified. That's the number one thing that gets modified in every building code, the building envelope expectations. That's I've been harping on building envelope for a long time, but it's the number one thing that gets modified. It's modified in Minnesota. It's been modified in almost every jurisdiction I've ever worked in. I think the other thing, and this might be a good place to bring it up, is to find there are. It is possible to make the energy code, to make codes that are performance based, but also have prescriptive requirements. So I've seen that in a couple of jurisdictions that I've worked in the past. So that's an opportunity as well, as to say, you can do your performance, you can do it through performance-based testing, but there are going to be some prescriptive expectations for you to meet.
Yeah, and I just would jump in just to add that I think, so our expectation had been for an ERI for residential and not for EUI, just to make sure that we were all on that page. And then the other piece of that is that a lot of our plans do, to speak to what you just said, our intent would be to align the performance path and prescriptive paths as much as we can, both for residential and also then for commercial. So looking at aligning those to be, obviously we all know there's variation in that. You can't align them exactly, but try to align them as much as possible so that they're giving similar performance as part of what we're trying to do. So just wanted to put that out there.
So maybe even asking a simplistic question here, and maybe this is too simplistic, but based on the 4 aspects of the 4 facets that Denver is assigning to zero net energy efficiency and renewably sourced energy, grid stability, and electrification, where do you see the greatest room for us to push the codes forward in 2021? Just based on what's being built right now, where would it be the least uncomfortable to start raising the bar? We have proposals related to all 4 facets to try to keep us on the trajectory, but at the same time, we understand that we may have to move faster on one facet and slower on another facet to stay in touch with how the technology is moving in Denver and the comfort level of the market. But we welcome any insight on where to push harder.
I'll throw out one for discussion. Right now, the code isn't doesn't describe mechanical efficiency requirements in any meaningful way. Would people be receptive to having a minimum mechanical efficiency for heating, cooling, and water heating that was, probably significantly better than federal minimums?
Robbie, can you expand on that a little bit? I'm not sure I follow that.
Well, right now you could still put in an 80% furnace in an IECC house. So if you had a requirement that you put in a 96% furnace as minimum, as an example, or a heat pump or something like that.
And my only one comment is we would have to be careful of federal preemption on that. So, and there are ways to do that, right? Incorporate it into code in different ways, but just to know.
Yeah.
And maybe a different way to ask this is, have people seen that higher efficiencies are achievable on this equipment without adding a lot of costs, and are maybe more the standard or the norm within the industry already? Has that been being pushed, or is the bare minimum challenging from a cost standpoint to beat?
I guess I'll jump in there, Christy. Cost is an issue. The more efficient equipment does cost more, and it seems like on the heating side, the average efficiency, and we're still probably primarily gas furnace market, is in that sealed combustion 92% efficient category. But you see markets like Colorado Springs where largely they're at a 96% market, and that's just happened organically.
So we could potentially nudge it to make it happen organically, but maybe a little bit faster without too much duress.
Yeah, but yes, and the main reason I bring it up is because half the largest equation, the building thermal envelope, I guess, and the mechanical equipment have to be pushed to a high level before it really makes sense to put renewables on to get to the zero energy goal. So we have to deal with, both these sides in an incremental way to get to that goal.
In terms of those higher efficiencies, it seems, since we're talking about the energy code and the green code, it's a stepped alternative. You put those very high percentages in the green code as an option and incentivize them, and people can choose to use those if they want, with something slightly lower and more achievable at a lower cost in the mandatory provisions of the green code.
I do want to add kind of one point on that equipment, and I feel like someone could certainly correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but I think that the way the equipment that gets you to that level of fuel utilization and the higher SEER levels, the boxes themselves are by and large identical between 94 and 97. And really when you get kind of beyond 14 SEER cooling equipment. But what really changes is the control systems. And I think this is just kind of, I'm playing a little bit of a spoiler here, but I think where we might see some concerns is that an immediate concern is that there are severe supply chain issues and find in HVAC right now, and being able to match up the equipment with the proper control systems might make that more challenging than I think we think it is in the immediate term. Once the supply chain gets sorted out and maybe it's a little bit less hot than it is right now, it's going to be easier to find paired systems. But I think it represents kind of an immediate threat to that of not being able to get equipment into houses.
And it's kind of a chicken and an egg, because we need the demand in order for the supply to increase so that there's greater availability of equipment so that pairing can happen.
Well, the demand is there right now. It's just that there's just no supply of it right now.
Why is the supply short? Is it, and excuse my ignorance on this, I'm just not familiar. Is it a national supply shortage? Is it a Colorado, Denver?
No, it's everybody nobody can get mechanicals right now. There's a supply shortage. We're seeing nationwide home building is going on at a record pace. In Minnesota, we're seeing the highest permitting since we've seen since 2006, 2007. And so it's timber prices are triple what they were even 6 months ago for dimensional lumber. There's the supply chain issues are universal, and really, I mean, even worldwide. I mean, they still need HVAC equipment in Western Europe too.
I do want to keep us moving here. We're running out of time. We still have 2 more big picture questions to get to. Moving on to number 5 here. Currently, the IACC has several compliance paths to quantify and attain the 2030 trajectory goal of zero energy homes. The prescriptive compliance path will need to be abandoned and replaced with one performance projection and outcome-based permitting and compliance process. Do you feel the Denver residential development community is ready to eliminate the prescriptive compliance path in the 2021 code development cycle, or should this be held back until the 2024 cycle? What support for community would be of the highest value to make the elimination of the prescriptive compliance path viable without duress?
I think Rob Buchanan spoke a little bit to this about potentially not completely doing away with the prescriptive path, and at least the way that the prescriptive path is currently looked at as specific requirements within a performance path. So if that helps anybody.
I agree. I mean, of course, I agree with myself, believe it or not. But I think that, if you eliminate a prescriptive path that can kind of set us up for, in the same fashion, kind of the way that LEED is kind of set up right now, of there's enough kind of ways to zigzag your way to higher performance that you can actually have a pretty marginal building and still get a very high LEED certification. And I think we need to be careful that we don't do the same. We don't provide a similar kind of circuitous route to quote unquote ultra high performance housing without the on a on an otherwise pretty marginal building.
Yeah. So you still have requirements, but you have a measured outcome. Are there any builders on the call that are solely doing the prescriptive path right now that might have a comment on this?
Or are there concerns for one-off home owners and home builders who are relying on the prescriptive path and getting to the performance path or a hybrid performance path? Would that be problematic? Do we have a perception that that's too much of a challenge?
I can tell you from an energy modeling standpoint, it's getting harder and harder to actually meet the performance path cost compliance without using prescriptive envelope measures. You know, there's really not a lot to trade off anymore. So I think that's something to really seriously think about. You know, when you talk to a builder and you're saying, well, yeah, you can hire us and use our services to meet the compliance path, but you're just as likely to get there by using prescriptive measures. It's a difficult sell. Unless they're really invested in a HERS score or an Excel rebate or something beyond just meeting code compliance.
So that brings up a good point, Steve, with the, if the prescriptive path were to go away, not necessarily the prescriptive requirements, would a performance path based on the ERI rather than the simulate performance path cost compliance be a better alternative?
I mean,
builders doing?
Yeah, that's what I put in the previous question. You know, if Denver really looked at if they, you know, looked at things the way Boulder is looking at things, you know, any home, I believe it's over 3,000 square feet has to be net zero. You know, Denver could modify that. They could do whatever they want, but more incentives to reach a target rather than just meeting code compliance, I think is really the way to get people moving forward.
Which, as Amber said, is the current kind of step plan or trajectory is based off of that.
I do think it's important to put together some of these modeling scenarios, because right now, as you know, I'm a plan reviewer. So right now we're seeing, I would say 95% of the projects coming in with the prescriptive method. So it's definitely going to create an obstacle when we go away from that, if it's a hard transition. But if we can create some of these new modeling techniques using, you know, something different than the traditional prescriptive method, I think it is going to help with that transition for our designers and builders.
Can you speak more to that with regards to modeling? Are you talking about offering resources to builders? or
Yeah,
actual?
more so like putting together some examples, right? Like I think one of the reasons why so many designers are using the prescriptive methods is because it's a little bit more cut and dry when applying it to the construction document and in the field to be built. Whereas some of these other UA trade-offs or the ERI, HERS methods, they're not as intuitive and straightforward because they kind of offer, in some ways, unlimited options. And so maybe putting together some scenarios where if you, kind of like as you guys were talking about before, it still like has a prescriptive intent. Like we're saying, if you do it in this exact manner, this is going to be your outcome. And sure, we can't account for, you know, the video game guy or whatnot, but if they're using, you know, an R50 in the ceiling and an R13 in the basement or something like that. So we're still giving them those values and those scenarios. They can look to it and just say, well, if we do it like this, it should perform at this rate, similar to how the prescriptive is currently written into the code, except for we're not using the prescriptive method as it is detailed today, but we're instead putting together some scenarios based on the ERI or the UA trade-offs or the HERS methods. Does that make sense?
Yes, it also seems like it's a good argument for keeping the prescriptive in the 2021 as that exact example, with somehow getting people into the Denver Green Code to show that in the 2024 the performance path would be the path.
Right. And so then just taking that again one step further, putting together some scenarios that meet that performance requirement based on a traditional 2,000 square foot home or something like that.
Well, if you kept the prescriptive R value table there and made sure it was linked, its values equaled the performance target that was chosen.
Exactly. Yes. I think that would help lay it out in a more clear way. And I think that's why right now we're seeing more folks go with the prescriptive method because it is laid out in that format.
Great. Thank you.
So to move on to our last question here, Daniel asked a question in the chat that sets us up for this one as well. Would you support a trajectory-based plan focused on existing dwellings for the 2021 cycle? Maybe introduce a benchmarking system to ensure that a building after an addition, alteration, or repair is equal to than what the building was before, and maybe looking forward to the 2024 to 2030 cycles require residential buildings to be X percentage better than the starting point. So kind of thinking about how to address those alterations or existing buildings moving forward, looking at the performance approach.
I think this is great and in line with, you know, kind of what we've been talking about here in the last question, number 5, and some of the ones leading up to it. I think absolutely for all of these, my opinion. But I do think that we're going to need to really dig into that study that we had done not too long ago that put us at the 40% when we were looking at meeting our air leakage in the field. I don't know the specifics of that report, but I remember some language saying that we're missing the mark and we're not quite getting there. And so I think if we dug into that a little bit more and seen why, because it seems like we have these provisions in front of us, they're coming through plan review, they're getting built in the field, they are already doing a before and after final blower door test, and we're still not meeting that mark. So where is it that the holes are in that report that we got to only a 40%? And hopefully we could, you know, build on those deficiencies. does anybody else have any ideas on different benchmarks or trajectories that we could implement to maybe measure some of these standards?
Yeah. I think that there are a variety of ways to basically benchmark the existing structure. You can do it simply with a blower door before and after test after, or you could do it with using the simulated performance path cost compliance report modeling, or with an ERI score. But this is a big change for additions, alterations, and repair. And it would require, in essence, a 3-step modeling or benchmarking type program. So I just want people to understand that if just the benchmarking part moved forward in the 2021 cycle, it would be a big change for the city and for primarily smaller contractors and homeowners to deal with. So do we feel that people are ready for it, or is there a way to extend it even, to extend the trajectory and make it an even more stepped approach?
Robbie, I see what you're saying regarding the challenges, for small projects to potentially hire a modeler or find a way to comply with a benchmarking option. But I think it could be a valuable and useful option for projects. Currently, right now, we're looking at a house that's trying to put an addition on, and they are struggling to meet prescriptive requirements. They're struggling to meet res check. And it's largely due to the existing architecture of the home and trying to get the ceiling to an R49. And they've got everything else in place. They've got, exterior rigid insulation they're going to put on to fill in the cavities. They're doing lots of good things to the envelope, but the roof is a problem just because of architecturally, when the house was built, there's no room for an R49. So I think even if a benchmarking or something similar was an option for additions, I see that as a useful tool.
So if we don't feel like we can benchmark for all, which I'm not saying that we're there yet, but if we were to determine that we didn't feel like we could benchmark for all, we could start with it as an option. And that would, Robbie, maybe speak to the more incremental approach, which slows things, but maybe introduces it.
Yeah. To keep the percentage of alteration as well, and then phase that to 0 or potentially.
Mm-hmm. Because I think one of the big things that we want to make sure we don't do is discourage updates to existing structures, right? Like, so we want to be super careful about not doing something that pushes people to say, oh my God, forget it, it's too much, and scrape things.
All right. Well, we are about at the end of our time today. I want to thank everyone for their engagement and participation. I do feel like this conversation was in fact that more of a conversation and more effective, I think, than our first meeting. So thank you for all that participated. A few reminders on the way out today. First, this mural board and the link that's in the top of the chat, we'll keep this open for about 24 hours following today's conversation, so that if you have any other ideas, or concepts, comments, or questions that you want to post on the mural board, feel free to come back in and do that between now and about noon tomorrow. I also want to remind everyone that we will be having our third and final Energy Code, IECC and Denver Green Code chapters 4 and 7 working group meeting 1 week from today. So next Tuesday, I believe that's the 8th. And in that meeting, we'll be looking to make a few decisions and provide some more specific direction about where we'd like to take a lot of these ideas. The idea of having engagement for everyone involved is to help drive the direction of these codes, not just so that the city can sit here and say, thou shalt comply with this. We invite you all to come back and join us next week.